Alexander had everything money could buy, but his controlled life fell apart after an accident. In the hospital, he meets Grace, a nurse who challenges him to reconsider his priorities. When he requests that she pretend to be his wife at a crucial meeting, they both end up discovering more than they had anticipated. How far will the charade go, and what is real? Hello, my friends. I am Linda, and this is Linda's Love Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. Alexander had always believed that money could buy everything. At 35 years old, he was the epitome of success. CEO of a rising technology company, owner of a stunning mansion, and an enviable collection of sports cars. His angular face and piercing green eyes frequently graced the covers of business magazines, portraying him as the most sought-after bachelor in the corporate world. However, behind the facade of success and confidence, Alexander carried deep emotional scars. The tumultuous divorce of his parents during his adolescence had marked him deeply. He witnessed the fights, the accusations of infidelity, and ultimately, the bitter division of assets. Since then, Alexander vowed never to allow himself to be so vulnerable. Money and power became his armor, keeping everyone at a safe distance. On a sunny spring morning, while driving his latest sports car along a winding mountain road, Alexander received an important call. Distracted by the conversation about a potential multi-million-dollar investment in his company, he failed to notice the sharp curve ahead. In a matter of seconds, the car skidded, flipping several times before coming to a stop at the bottom of a ravine. Alexander's world, once so controlled and predictable, suddenly turned into a whirlwind of sirens, flashing lights, and urgent voices. He struggled to stay conscious as he was pulled from the wreckage and placed in an ambulance. The pain was excruciating, but what terrified him most was the sense of helplessness. For the first time in many years, Alexander had no control over the situation. In the hospital, amidst the haze of painkillers and the constant sound of monitors, Alexander met Grace Sullivan. With her brown hair tied back in a messy bun and honey-coloured eyes that radiated a mix of compassion and determination, Grace was the head nurse responsible for his care. Grace, also 35, had a very different story from Alexander's. The daughter of a firefighter and a teacher, she grew up in a modest but loving home. From a young age, she felt the call to care for others, leading her to nursing. Over the years, she had seen it all in the hospital. Moments of joy, sadness, miracles, and farewells. Each experience made her stronger and more compassionate. In the first days after the accident, Alexander proved to be a difficult patient. Accustomed to giving orders and having his wishes fulfilled immediately, he became frustrated with the limitations of his condition. Grace, however, was not intimidated by his outbursts of anger or attempts to use his influence to receive special treatment. "Mr. Alexander," she said in a firm but gentle voice, "I understand your frustration, but here in the hospital all patients are equal. What truly matters is your health, not your bank balance." Initially irritated by Grace's attitude, Alexander gradually began to respect her. She was the first person in a long time to treat him as a regular human being, not as a powerful millionaire. Their conversations, initially limited to medical instructions, gradually became more personal. One night, when the pain kept him awake, Alexander opened up to Grace about his fears and insecurities. He talked about his parents' divorce, how he had built his life focusing solely on financial success, and how, lying in that hospital bed, he realized the emptiness of his existence. Grace listened to him attentively, offering not judgment, but understanding. She shared some of her own experiences, talking about patients who had faced similar challenges and how many of them found a new purpose after moments of crisis. As the days went by, Alexander found himself eagerly anticipating Grace's visits. Her warm smile and contagious laughter brought light into the sterile hospital room. He began to notice small details about her. How she always had a kind word for other patients, how her eyes lit up when she talked about her work, and how she seemed genuinely happy despite living a much simpler life than his. 2 weeks after the accident, when Alexander was already recovering well, he received news that threw him into a panic. The important online meeting, via Zoom, with the investors, which could determine the future of his company, had been rescheduled to 2 days later. Alexander knew that his current appearance, pale, with visible bruises and clearly hospitalized, could jeopardize the negotiations. Desperate, he had an idea. If he could show the investors that despite the accident, his personal life was stable and happy, he might be able to convey the image of control that they expected. With his heart racing, he anxiously awaited Grace's next visit. When she entered the room, Alexander took a deep breath and made the most unusual request of his life. "Grace, I need a huge favor. I know it's crazy, but could you pretend to be my wife during a video call with some investors?" Grace stared at him, bewildered. For a moment, Alexander feared she would scold him, or worse, laugh at him. But then, to his surprise, a small smile formed on her lips. "Let me get this straight," she said, crossing her arms. "You want me, a nurse you've known for 2 weeks, to pretend to be your devoted wife to impress some businessman?" Alexander nodded, feeling increasingly foolish by the second. Grace seemed to ponder for a moment before responding. "All right, Mr. Alexander, but be aware that marriage comes with obligations. Who's going to take out the trash?" The unexpected joke broke the tension, and both burst into laughter. Alexander felt a strange warmth in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in a long time. Genuine connection with someone. On the day of the video call, Grace appeared in Alexander's room wearing an elegant blouse she had borrowed from a colleague. Her hair, usually tied back, fell in soft waves over her shoulders. Alexander was momentarily speechless upon seeing her. During the call, Grace flawlessly portrayed the role of a loving and concerned wife. She spoke naturally about their life together, mentioning details she had memorized about Alexander's routine. The investors seemed delighted, and Alexander could sense that the meeting was going well. However, as the conversation progressed, something strange started to happen. Grace's responses, though fictitious, seemed strangely accurate. She talked about the Alexander she had gotten to know over the past few weeks, a vulnerable, reflective man who could laugh at himself. It was as if she were describing not the arrogant millionaire he used to be, but the man he could become. When the call ended, there was a moment of silence in the room. Alexander looked at Grace, feeling a confused mix of gratitude, admiration, and something else he couldn't quite name. "Thank you," he finally said. "You were amazing." Grace smiled, but there was a shadow of sadness in her eyes. "It was a pleasure to help, Mr. Alexander. I hope you got what you needed from the meeting." She turned to leave, but Alexander called her back. "Grace, I don't know how to thank you. This meant a lot to me." She nodded, her smile now softer. "I'm glad I could help. But remember, Mr. Alexander, real life is much more complicated than a half-hour video call." With those words she left, leaving Alexander immersed in thought. In the days that followed, Alexander found himself even more anxious for Grace's visits. But something had changed. She maintained a professional distance, limiting their interactions to what was strictly necessary. Alexander missed the casual conversations, the shared laughter. He realized, with a pang of regret, that he might have crossed a line by asking her to pretend to be his wife. As his recovery progressed, Alexander began to seriously reflect on his life. Grace's words during the video call echoed in his mind. She had described a man he wanted to be, someone compassionate, capable of genuine connections, someone who lived not just for work but for meaningful relationships. A week before being discharged, Alexander made a decision. He asked to speak with Grace in private. "Grace," he began, feeling as nervous as a teenager, "I wanted to apologize for putting you in that situation with the video call. It was inappropriate and selfish of me." Grace looked at him in surprise but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "But more than that," Alexander went on, "I wanted to thank you, not just for what you did that day, but for everything, for the care, for the honesty, for treating me like a person and not just a client or a bank account." He paused, gathering the courage for what would come next. "Grace, I know this might sound strange, but When I leave here, I would like to invite you for a coffee. Not as patient and nurse, but as two people who perhaps could get to know each other better. The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Grace studied him with an inscrutable expression. "Alexander," she finally said, using his first name for the first time. "I appreciate your honesty, but you need to understand that what you felt here, in this hospital, may not be real. You were vulnerable, in a stressful situation. It's natural to seek connection under such circumstances." Alexander felt his heart sink, but Grace wasn't finished. "However," she continued, a small smile forming on her lips, "I also felt something during these weeks, something that surprised me. So yes, when you get out of here, we can grab a coffee, but with one condition." "Anything," Alexander replied, barely able to contain his excitement. "No pretenses, no roles, just Alexander and Grace, two people genuinely trying to get to know each other." Alexander agreed, feeling as though a huge weight had been lifted off his shoulders. For the first time in years, he was looking forward to the future not because of a business deal or an acquisition, but because of the possibility of a genuine connection. On the day of his discharge, Alexander left the hospital not only with his body healed, but with a new perspective on life. As he walked towards the afternoon sun, he saw Grace waiting for him in the parking lot, far from her nurse's uniform, looking relaxed and radiant in casual clothes. "Ready for that coffee?" she asked with a smile. Alexander smiled back, feeling truly happy for the first time in a long while. "More than ready," he replied. As they walked together, Alexander realized that the accident, which initially seemed like a tragedy, had become a turning point in his life. He had entered the hospital as a lonely and egocentric millionaire, and was leaving as a man ready to open his heart and rediscover the true meaning of wealth. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Alexander was excited to explore it. With Grace by his side, he felt ready to face any challenge that lay ahead. And who knows, perhaps one day, the idea of marriage wouldn't just be an act, but a reality built on a foundation of love, trust, and mutual understanding. As they walked into the cafe, laughing at a shared joke, Alexander was certain that regardless of what the future held, he had already found something far more valuable than any bank account: the chance for a new beginning and the promise of true love. If you enjoyed, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment with a number from 1 to 5 to let us know how much you liked the story. Also, watch the video that is currently on your screen. See you soon.